I can't keep pretending I understand this. You said it out loud, finally. After 3 weeks of nodding in class while your stomach twisted into knots. After copying notes you couldn't decipher an hour later. After watching classmates discuss concepts that sounded like a foreign language. You said it to your roommate at 2 a.m. in the morning, staring at a problem set due in 6 hours, and the moment the words left your mouth, you felt something break. Not relief. Terror. Because now it was real. Now someone else knew. Now you couldn't hide behind the carefully maintained fiction that you were keeping up. Your roommate looked at you like you'd just confessed to a crime. Because in the world you both inhabit, you'd admitted weakness. You'd exposed the gap between what you're supposed to know and what you actually know. And in that moment, everything you'd feared became visible. The fraudulence, the inadequacy, the possibility that maybe you don't belong here after all. This is where most people stay, frozen in that moment of exposure, trying to stuff the confession back inside, trying to rebuild the mask, trying to pretend the crack never appeared. But the crack is everything. It's the only honest thing that's happened in weeks. And what you do next determines whether you drown or finally learn to swim. The myth lives in every classroom, in every study group, in every conversation about grades and understanding and who gets it and who doesn't. The myth says that smart people don't struggle, that real intelligence is effortless, that if you have to work hard, if you have to ask questions, if you have to admit confusion, then you're not actually smart. You're just someone who's faking it, someone who slipped through the cracks, someone who doesn't belong. This myth has 1,000 variations, but they all point to the same poison. Struggle is shameful. Confusion is weakness. Asking for help is surrender. The people who succeed are the ones who figured it out alone, naturally, without visible effort. Everyone else is just pretending, and the worst thing you can do is let anyone see you pretending. So you don't ask the question in class even though you're lost. You don't go to office hours even though you're drowning. You don't admit to your study group that you have no idea what's happening. You perform understanding. You nod at the right moments. You take notes that look legitimate. You maintain the appearance of keeping up while falling further behind every single day. This performance feels like protection, like if you can just maintain it long enough, somehow the understanding will arrive. Somehow you'll catch up. Somehow the gap between what you know and what you need to know will close itself. It won't. The gap doesn't close on its own, it widens. Every day you pretend is a day you don't actually learn. Every question you swallow that is a piece of information you will never have. Every moment of confusion you hide becomes permanent because you never addressed it when it was still fixable. The people who study power understood this pattern. They understood that what looks like strength is often terror wearing a mask. That the loudest claims of competence usually signal the deepest insecurity. That those who perform certainty most aggressively are frequently the ones most afraid of being exposed as uncertain. You're doing this right now, not because you're weak, because you think performing strength is the same as being strong, because you've confused the appearance of understanding with actual understanding, because you believe that admitting struggle will destroy you when the truth is that denying struggle is what's destroying you. Consider what's actually happening. You're in class and the professor explains a concept. It doesn't make sense. You feel that familiar twist of panic. Everyone else is nodding, taking notes, asking smart-sounding follow-up questions. So you nod too. You write something down, you look engaged, and the moment passes. The professor moves on. And you've just locked in another piece of permanent confusion because you chose the performance over the reality. Do this enough times and you're not learning anymore. You're just managing anxiety. You're not engaging with the material. You're engaging with your fear of being seen as someone who doesn't get the material. Those are completely different activities. One leads to growth. The other leads to exactly where you are now. Stuck. Falling behind. Increasingly certain that you're the problem when the real problem is the strategy you're using to avoid the problem. The students who make it aren't smarter than you. This is the part that makes it unbearable. You can see them. You know they're not superhuman. They're not working with different brains or different circumstances, but they're succeeding while you're drowning. And the difference isn't intelligence. It's that they stopped playing the game you're still losing. They stopped treating every moment of confusion as a test of their worth. They stopped protecting their ego and started protecting their education. Watch what happens when someone asks the obvious question. The question everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say. There's a shift in the room, a release. Suddenly, 3 other people have related questions. The professor slows down, explains the thing they'd moved past too quickly, and everyone benefits. Except the benefit only exists because someone was willing to look stupid. Someone was willing to break the performance. Someone chose temporary discomfort over permanent ignorance. That could be you. It should be you. But it's not, because you're still committed to the mask. Still convinced that appearing smart is more important than becoming capable. Still treating your education like a performance to judge rather than a skill to build. And that commitment is costing you everything. Perhaps you've noticed how much energy the performance requires. How exhausting it is to constantly monitor what you reveal and what you hide. To calculate which questions are safe and which ones expose too much. To maintain the fiction of understanding across multiple classes, multiple conversations, multiple moments every single day. That energy could be going toward actual learning. Instead, it's going toward the management of an illusion that's slowly suffocating you. Some of you are reading this and feeling seen. Feeling that uncomfortable recognition of your own patterns. If that's happening, understand that this recognition isn't an attack, it's an opportunity. Most people never see the trap they're in clearly enough to escape it. They just keep performing until they fail, or until they convince themselves that failure was inevitable. You're seeing it now. The question is what you do with that sight. There are ways to respond to difficulty that don't involve either performance or surrender. Strategies that work regardless of how smart you are or how behind you've fallen. These aren't tricks. They're not shortcuts. They're the actual mechanics of how capable people handle challenge, and the reason they work is that they're based on reality instead of the story you're telling yourself about reality. Silence can be the most powerful response to confusion, not the silence of fear. Not the frozen paralysis of someone too scared to speak. Real silence. The silence that listens, that absorbs, that creates space for information instead of filling every moment with performance. When you're confused and you choose silence, you're not admitting defeat. You're gathering intelligence. You're learning what you don't know. You're identifying the actual gaps instead of just feeling generally overwhelmed. This kind of silence is active. You're there. You're engaged. You're taking in everything. But you're not performing. You're not pretending. You're not expending energy on managing how you appear. All that energy goes toward actually processing what's being said. And when you do speak, when you do ask, it's targeted, specific, based on actual understanding of what you need rather than random panic. Most people can't do this because they can't tolerate the discomfort of not having an answer, of not looking like they're keeping up. So they fill the silence with performance, with nodding and note-taking and smart-sounding questions that don't actually help them learn, and they never develop the capacity to sit with confusion long enough to understand it. Patience means recognizing that understanding takes time, that the confusion you feel today doesn't have to be permanent. That mastery is built through repeated engagement, not sudden insight. But patience only works if you're actually engaging, if you're using the time to build understanding rather than hoping. Understanding will magically arrive. The patient response to confusion is not to wait and hope. It's to systematically address the gaps while you still have time. You're not being patient when you tell yourself you'll figure it out eventually. That's avoidance pretending to be patience. Real patience looks like going to office hours every week, like working through practice problems even when they're frustrating, like asking the same question 3 different ways until it finally makes sense, like accepting that this is hard and committing to the process of making it less hard through sustained effort. The impatient response is actually what you're doing now. You want immediate understanding. You want to look at the material once and have it click. And when it doesn't, you panic. You decide you're not smart enough. You give up or you fake it. Real patience would recognize that most people need multiple exposures, multiple explanations, multiple attempts. That this is normal. That the path to mastery is supposed to include confusion. Timing matters more than almost anything. The best time to ask for help is not when you're completely lost, not when the exam is tomorrow and you're in full panic mode. The best time is the first moment of real confusion, before it compounds, before it turns into anxiety, before the gap becomes a canyon. But you don't do that. You wait. You hope it resolves itself. You let small confusion become large confusion, become complete overwhelm. And by the time you finally ask for help, catching up requires heroic effort instead of simple clarification. Strategic timing means treating confusion as immediate information rather than eventual problem. The moment something doesn't make sense, that's your signal. Not to panic, not to judge yourself, just to note it. This is where I lost the thread. This is what I need to understand. Let me address it now while addressing it is still simple. Let me ask the question while it's still a small question. Let me fill the gap while it's still a gap and not a void. Most people's timing is backwards. They wait until crisis to take action. They let problems accumulate until they're overwhelming. They treat early confusion as something to ignore and late-stage failure as something to address. But by the time you're in crisis, your options are limited. You're not learning anymore. You're just trying to survive. Strategic timing means acting early when action is still cheap. When a single question or a single office hour visit can prevent weeks of confusion. Non-reaction might be the skill that changes everything. Your entire relationship to difficulty is reactive. You encounter confusion and immediately spiral. What does this mean about me? Why don't I understand this? Everyone else gets it. I'm going to fail. I don't belong here. The confusion triggers an emotional storm that makes engaging with the actual problem impossible. You're not thinking about the material anymore. You're thinking about yourself, about what the confusion means, about what it says about your intelligence and your future and your worth. Watch what happens when you don't react that way. When you encounter something you don't understand and you simply observe it. This is confusing. I need more information. What specifically don't I understand? What question would help? The confusion is just data. It's information about the gap between what you know and what the material assumes you know. It doesn't mean anything about you. It's not a judgment. It's not a prediction. It's just a fact. This thing is currently unclear. Now what? Non-reaction doesn't mean you don't feel the anxiety. You feel it. The panic is still there, but you don't let it dictate your behavior. You feel the fear of looking stupid, and you ask the question anyway. You feel the embarrassment of being confused, and you go to office hours anyway. You feel the shame of being behind, and you do the work to catch up anyway. The feeling exists, but it doesn't control you. That's what non-reaction actually means. Detachment is about separating your identity from your current state of understanding. Right now, you're confused about organic chemistry. That's a fact. But you've turned it into, I'm bad at organic chemistry. I'm not a science person. I don't belong in this major. You've collapsed the distance between a temporary state and a permanent identity, and once you've made it identity, changing it feels impossible, because changing it means changing who you are rather than just changing what you know. Detachment means maintaining the distinction. Yes, I'm confused right now. No, that doesn't define me. Yes, this is hard. No, that doesn't mean I can't learn it. Yes, I need help. No, that doesn't make me inferior. You're observing your experience without drowning in it. Without making it mean more than it means. The confusion is just confusion. The difficulty is just difficulty. Neither one is a verdict on your capability. Most people can't do this. They're so fused with their experience that they can't see it clearly. Every struggle becomes proof of inadequacy. Every moment of confusion becomes evidence that they don't belong. They can't separate the temporary from the permanent, the state from the identity, and that fusion makes change impossible because every attempt to change feels like an attack on who they are. Strategic withdrawal is knowing when to stop fighting. Not every battle matters equally. Not every class is worth the cost you're paying. Sometimes the intelligent move is to recognize that this particular struggle, in this particular moment, isn't serving you. That you can step back, regroup, return when you're better positioned, or not return at all because you've realized this path isn't actually yours. But withdrawal is only strategic if it's conscious. If you're making a choice based on clear assessment rather than fleeing in panic. If you're recognizing that your resources are finite and this particular investment isn't generating return, most people can't do this. They're so committed to the story they're telling about themselves that they'll destroy themselves rather than adjust the story. They'll push through classes they hate, pursuing degrees they don't want because stopping feels like failure. Real strategy means being willing to cut losses. To recognize when you're pouring effort into something that isn't working and won't work. To redirect that effort towards something more aligned with your actual capabilities and interests. That's not weakness. That's intelligence. But it requires killing the ego that insists you should be able to do everything. That treats every withdrawal as defeat, rather than sometimes withdrawal is the victory. Now consider what happens when you reject all of this. When you keep performing, keep pretending, keep hoping that somehow you'll figure it out without having to expose yourself. What are the actual consequences? You don't learn, obviously. You can't learn while performing. Learning requires vulnerability, requires admitting gaps, requires exposing confusion. Every hour you spend maintaining the illusion is an hour you don't spend building actual understanding. The performance prevents the growth it's supposedly protecting. You exhaust yourself. The performance requires constant energy, constant vigilance, constant management of what you show and what you hide. You're running two parallel processes: the cognitive work of trying to learn and the emotional work of managing perception. That second process consumes resources you desperately need for the first. You're tired not because the material is hard, but because performing while learning is impossible. You isolate yourself because connection requires honesty. When you're performing, nobody can actually reach you. Nobody can help because nobody knows you need help. Nobody can relate because you're not showing them anything real. You're surrounded by people who might share your struggles, but you'll never know because everyone's too busy performing. And that isolation makes everything harder because you're trying to solve problems that other people have already solved, but you can't access their solutions because you can't admit you need them. You build a foundation of lies. Every time you pretend to understand something you don't, you're creating debt. The concepts you're supposed to master now are the foundation for what comes next. When you fake mastery, you're not just harming present you, you're sabotaging future you. The person who will have to somehow build advanced understanding on a foundation that doesn't exist. The debt compounds. This week's confusion makes next week harder. Next week's avoidance makes next month impossible. By midterms, you're so far behind that catching up would require admitting how lost you've been. And that admission feels more impossible than the actual work of catching up, so you don't admit it. You keep performing, you keep sinking, and eventually you convince yourself the problem is your intelligence rather than your strategy. This is how capable people fail. Not because they lack ability, because they can't admit they need to approach the work differently. Because they're so invested in appearing naturally talented that they'd rather fail than reveal effort. Because they mistake the performance of competence for actual competence and never realize the performance is what's killing them. Every emotional reaction hands power to the thing you're reacting to. Every time you let fear prevent you from asking a question, fear controls you. Every time you let pride prevent you from getting help, pride controls you. Every time you let anxiety shut you down, instead of directing you towards solution, anxiety controls you. You think you're protecting yourself, but you're not. You're just making the suffering private instead of temporary. The cost of reaction is that you stay stuck. The confusion that triggered the reaction doesn't resolve. The gap that caused the anxiety doesn't close. You just learn to live with increasingly urgent distress while the actual problem gets worse. And the worse it gets, the more impossible it feels to address. Until you're so far gone that even thinking about catching up triggers panic. So, you stop thinking about it. You just endure. And hope somehow you make it through. But you know you won't. Not like this. Not with this strategy. You can feel it. The slow slide toward failure. The growing certainty that you're not going to make it. The quiet recognition that something has to change. You're reading this because some part of you already knows the performance isn't working, already understands that you can't keep doing this. The question is whether you'll act on that knowledge or just add it to the pile of things you know but refuse to face. The students who make it made a choice you haven't made yet. They decided that capability mattered more than appearance. That growth mattered more than ego. That temporary discomfort was preferable to permanent inadequacy. They asked the stupid questions. They went to office hours. They admitted confusion. They stopped performing and started building, and it worked. Not because they were special, because the strategy of engaging with reality instead of managing perception is the only strategy that works. You can make that choice, right now, today. You can decide that the next time you're confused, you'll say so. That the next time you're lost, you'll ask for directions. That the next time you're struggling, you'll get help instead of suffering in silence. It will feel dangerous. It will feel like exposure. But the alternative is what you're doing now, and you already know where that leads. The people who built and maintained power understood that strength isn't about appearance, it's about effectiveness, about achieving objectives regardless of how it looks, about being willing to do what works even when what works feels uncomfortable or undignified, about separating ego from strategy and choosing strategy every time. You're losing a war you don't have to fight. You're defending territory that doesn't exist. You're sacrificing real capability to maintain imaginary appearance. And every day you continue is a day you fall further behind. Not because you're not smart enough, because you're too proud to admit you need help. Too scared to look weak. Too committed to a story that's destroying you. There's no rescue coming. No sudden insight that makes it all make sense. No magical moment where you wake up and everything's clear. There's only the choice, the daily choice, to engage or perform, to build or pretend, to grow or stagnate. You're making that choice right now, whether you realize it or not. The question is which choice you're making, and whether you have the courage to make the other one. Some of you will read this, and nothing will change. You'll recognize yourself in every word and still walk back into the same patterns tomorrow. Still sit in class pretending, still avoid office hours, still drown in silence while maintaining the performance, because change feels more dangerous than suffering. Because admitting you need to do things differently feels like admitting you're not who you thought you were. Others will take this as permission. Permission to stop performing, to start asking, to admit confusion without shame, to treat learning like something you're building rather than something you're faking. Those are the ones who make it, not because they're smarter, because they're strategic enough to separate what matters from what doesn't, to choose growth over ego, reality over story. The cost of staying stuck is everything you could have become if you'd been willing to look weak while getting strong. Every skill you didn't develop because you were too proud to admit you needed to learn it. Every opportunity you missed because you were managing perception instead of building capability. Every version of yourself you'll never meet because you chose the performance over the reality. That cost accumulates in silence. You'll never know exactly what you lost. You'll just know that somehow life kept moving forward while you stayed in place. That other people seemed to figure it out while you struggled. That the distance between where you are and where you wanted to be kept growing. And you'll tell yourself it's because you weren't smart enough, because you didn't have what it takes, when the truth is simpler and more brutal. You had everything you needed. You just refused to use it because using it required looking like you needed it. The path forward isn't complicated. Stop performing. Start engaging. Treat confusion as information instead of judgment. Ask questions. Get help. Build understanding instead of managing appearance. Do the uncomfortable thing that leads to growth instead of the comfortable thing that leads to stagnation. Choose capability over ego, reality over story, growth over performance. Make that choice or don't. But understand that not choosing is still a choice. That every day you maintain the performance is a day you choose stagnation. That the cost of that choice is being paid by your future self. The person who will have to live with the capabilities you're failing to develop right now. The person who will wonder why you chose pride over growth when growth was always available, when all it required was the willingness to look weak while getting strong.